Hi, everyone, and welcome into the Comics Lair. We're sponsored by Heroes Aren't Hard to Find and Heroes Convention. I'm your host, Nancy Northcott. This panel will discuss Shang Chi and his journey. And here's the spoiler alert, because even though this was a 2021 movie, there may be some people who have not yet seen it, and there will be spoilers. So if you care about having the movie spoiled for you and have not seen it yet, you might want to go watch the movie and then come back and watch this panel. So we'll start by asking the panelists to introduce themselves, tell us a little bit about themselves, and how they first became interested in Shang-Chi, which I'm probably not pronouncing correctly. I tried to rewatch the movie and get it, so apologies if I'm not pronouncing it correctly. And Wayland, we'll start with you.
I write under the name Wayland Smith. I've got assorted superhero short stories and novels out, and I've written in pretty much every genre at least once. I've been reading comics my entire life and pretty steadily since the mid-'80s. So that would be where I first ran across Shang-Chi, and I think that's how you pronounce it, but I won't lay money on it either. So I may be one of the few people who was familiar with him before talk of the movie came out, but we'll see how that goes.
Okay. Jeannie?
Hey, y'all. I'm Jeanne Adams. I write paranormal romantic suspense, urban fantasy, and space adventure with our wonderful host, Nancy Northcott. And Shang-Chi, I first learned about it from the comics, but then I didn't ever read it. And so I was kind of surprised when the movie appeared on the radar screen. And I was like, oh, well, cool. All right. And I loved the movie. So that's why I'm with that.
Steve?
Yeah, I'm Steve Sellers. I am a writer for Omen Comics and Revelation Comics, including titles like Blitz, White Druid, and Michael Nero, Guardians of the Lamb. I also write for Raincross Press for an anthology called Blood World. And beyond that, I do occasional reviews. I do podcasts, including the Fellowship of the D20, which is kind of our D&D session for Sundays. And so I do a lot of those things. And as far as Shang-Chi is concerned, and forgive me if I'm completely butchering the language, the Rising and Advancing of the Spirit is how you would say his name. Yeah. I kind of go back quite a bit, mainly kind of my teenagers finding Master of Kung Fu in back issue bins. So I have read some of those, including some of the Epic collections. So I am reasonably familiar with Shang-Chi, as well as the Max series by Mention Galechi. So I know a little bit about that. I've read some of the Jean Luen Yang issues. He's quite good. And I'm looking forward to talking about it. This is a character that I really like kind of in his classic form, but I do kind of have questions, shall we say, about the way that he's evolved, but we'll get into that.
Okay. Len?
I'm Len Berry. I like to label myself as the writer of ethereal darkness. That goes into the realm of science fiction and dark fantasy and a little bit of dystopian. I got a lot of background in not just reading books, but also in reading comics. So I got hooked in with the craze of the X-Men, and I met Shang-Chi there.
Jenny?
Hi, I'm Gini Koch. I write the Alien Catherine Kitty Cat series for Dog Books. I also write under a variety of other pen names and in all lengths and genres. And I'm a comics geek from way, way back. Like Len, though, I only know Shang-Chi from X-Men. I knew he was out there. He just didn't appeal to me at all, but I really did enjoy the movie.
And if you've been to these panels before, you know I've been reading comics since I was about 8 years old. And I noticed Shang-Chi and I noticed Power Man and Iron Fist, but I wasn't really that into the idea of martial arts comic books, so I just never picked them up. And then I was reading Gail Simone's Domino, I guess you'd call it a maxi series, and he had a guest appearance in there. And I thought, well, this character is kind of interesting. So then when the movie came out and they did the mini series leading up to it, Marvel did, and by that I mean comic book miniseries leading up to it, I read it and I thought, well, this is kind of interesting. I could like this. And so then I watched the movie and really was intrigued by it and by the possibilities of it. And I'm kind of disappointed there hasn't been a sequel. But before we started recording, Wayland said there was something he particularly wanted to mention about Shang-Chi. So, Wayland, why don't you kick that off, and then we'll let anybody else weigh in if they want to.
I do not know the date when this happened. I have seen it referred to several times in the comics. For a while, at least, they decided that Chang, being an absolutely world-class martial artist, one of the best fighters on the planet, wasn't good enough, and they just played with the idea of giving him powers. And for a while, at least, he had the ability to create duplicates of himself, like Multiple Man. So he's a bad enough foe on his own. I cannot imagine trying to fight an army worth of him. But I believe that move was not particularly popular because, aside from hearing it referenced once or twice, it seems like everyone who's written him since then has decided to ignore this development.
Anybody else?
I just find it kind of insulting that they gave him someone else's power that was already very well established. So come up with something else. Ability to create a dragon or something, that would have at least been cool, other than, hey, you can be like Multiple Man. Yay! So
it's not even necessary. This is a guy who can fight on a level of Captain America, Batman, and people like that. Mm-hmm. You do not need powers if you can do that. Right. It's ridiculous.
Yeah, fully agree. I mean, they've given Multiple Man the background of saying, hey, he went out, learned all these things, and then drew it back in. So now all of them know that. So they just, that's just Multiple Man. No, I want Shang-Chi to be Shang-Chi. No, he needs to be the best at Kung Fu. That can be his coin.
Well, and he's so good at Kung Fu, plus he's got the 10 rings. I mean, really? Do you think he needs more?
Well, that actually brings up something I was going to suggest that we talk about further on, which is the 10 rings and the use of the 10 rings. Because at least in the movie, and as best I remember in the comic book, he doesn't really have any training for using these rings. And they're really kind of shifting over into the territory of magic more than martial arts. And yet they were crucial to the ending of the movie. And so how do you feel about that? Jeannie, you want to start?
Sure. Well, I thought it was really well done in the movie that they introduced that Zhu Wenwu, the father, has used them for centuries to not only prolong his life, but to conquer nations. And so we know they're powerful and we know they're magical. And then you have the whole scenario where I guess I thought the play out of how the rings work and how the rings affect the world, both our world and the parallel world, was really cool. But I think they indicated, Nancy, exactly what you're saying, is that they're magic. And so when we get to the end and the after scene credits, we see that that's actually being addressed, that they're not really, they're more like Mjolnir than they are, I never say that right, than they are any other thing in our world. So I think they're going to, that's why I too have been disappointed that there hasn't been notes about a sequel yet, because they just left that hanging.
I've heard bits about that as well, but we'll get to that later.
Steve, did you want to add anything?
Yeah, I mean, the whole thing with the 10 rings, I've never really been a fan of it, and it's a comics purist in me. I kind of prefer him, just as a martial artist, and all of that. It's just that they kind of grafted on elements of the Mandarin from Iron Man, and with this Eastern, mystical sort of element to it, grafted on to a version of Fu Manchu, who they can't call him Fu Manchu. Presumably because of all the rights issues involved, and probably all the negative connotations to the character too. So it's just, it's not a bad movie if you take it in and of itself. It's certainly better than Iron Man 3 in terms of how they handled the Mandarin. So I will give them props for that. But it's just not what I would have preferred to see as a fan. Let's just put it that way.
Len?
Yeah, I've got to follow on that, because I was wondering how they were. I always have the mindset of when they adapt a comic book character into a movie, it's like, okay, who's the villain? And the weirdest thing about Iron Man movies is they never used his number one villain. So they said, "Hey, we're going to do Shang-Chi. We're going to do Shang-Chi movie." I'm like, "Okay, who's the villain?" "Yeah, it's going to be called Shang-Chi and the Ten Rings." Oh, they gave him Iron Man's number one villain. I'm there. So they went into that magic direction, I think, because they needed to say, well, what kind of universe interacting role can we give Shang-Chi? Which has become more and more difficult as time has gone on, especially in comics, but, especially when you're going to a movie audience, how does this matter to what we've been selling? Well, they made it matter. They said, hey, let's use this thing we haven't used. And like Steve said, they did a lot better job than Iron Man 3 on that front.
Jenny?
Well, I think part of it, too, is an apology for Iron Man 3. There was a lot of backlash for how they did the Mandarin, which once sorry, spoilers abound, but these movies are old by now. So if you haven't seen them, pardon me for ruining Iron Man 3 for you. But the fact that he's an actor and he's an idiot playing that, and there's stuff that keeps coming up with Trevor later and later, that is actually very fun. But if you went in expecting the Mandarin, which every comic geek did, and you didn't get it, it was not great. And I think they were trying to not offend China, and they managed to offend China by trying not to offend China. So Shang-Chi is very clearly the apology movie to China. Okay, look, we'll make a really good one. I think it is I looked at it when we watched it. We hadn't seen it in the theaters. We're still in the middle of doing a Marvel, timeline, rewatch. And so we came into that super, super clean. And for me, it really reminded me of movies like Forbidden Kingdom and some of the others, where it's really got this beautiful blend of Chinese mysticism and culture with a lot of fun and action and interesting things. So I thought they did a really, really good job with that, where it could stand alone outside of the Marvel universe as a really excellent, Hong Kong kung fu movie, but it also fits into the universe. And I would assume they're waiting to do something with them and Doctor Strange, because that was really obvious. Come to this, the sanctum. So I too am waiting patiently for that.
Okay. Wayland?
Well, the Mandarin thing has gotten really complicated because there's this thing that I personally have called media creep, which whenever something gets popular from a TV or a movie adaptation, it sort of starts sliding into the comics. So right now in the comics, you have the movie version of the Ten Rings, which pop up pretty much anytime Shang-Chi does now. But the Mandarin version of the Ten Rings is an ongoing issue in all of the Iron Man comics right now. So you've got both going, and it's a little confusing because they're at least called the same thing. Shang-Chi's history, his real world history, is a lot more complicated than his comic book and movie history. I've always really loved the character, but the more I've learned about the behind the scenes stuff, the more I've been like, wow, that was screwed up.
Yeah, I really liked the way the rings were used in the movie, and I thought it was very effective there at the end. But part of me was sitting there thinking, this is not really martial arts, this is magic. How does he know how to do this? And so it didn't stop me from enjoying the movie, but it does bother me a little bit when somebody accesses magic or some other ability like that, and nobody explains to me how they know how to use it. A couple of sentences and I'd be happy, but those couple of sentences either weren't there or I had a space out moment and missed them.
It's because he's so awesome.
I mean, his friend became a master archer in 5 minutes?
Yeah.
Yes.
Right, exactly.
Although
you can get away with a little bit. Yeah.
Huh?
I was going to say you can get away with a little bit of nonsense if you try to say, okay, this is just how their martial arts work, or that style of martial arts work. Sure. The Last Airbender, do those kinds of things where there's a certain amount of mysticism within the fighting style itself. If you kind of go along with that, then you can forgive certain weird things happening. I mean, look at Crouching Tiger, Hidden Dragon, where everybody runs on the air and runs up walls. So,
well, I saw James Cagney dance up a wall in Yankee Doodle Dandy, but not all the way up the wall, just halfway up the wall.
Yeah.
Does anybody want to talk about anything like this anymore? Anybody want to add anything before we move on?
The only other thing I'd say is that I'd argue if you put too much magic stuff into Shang-Chi, then it gets harder to distinguish him from Iron Fist.
Yeah.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah, I mean, as it is, he basically has a Kunlun type realm that he goes to that full of all magic stuff and dragons and whatnot.
Yeah. Yeah,
that's always been the awesome thing about Shang-Chi is in this world of supers, he holds his own just off of pure skill. He is that good. And I love a lot of his more recent appearances over the last several years. Every other hero dealing with him has this huge amount of respect for him, which is really kind of cool to see.
Well, and I think they did a great job of situating him as having this power and these skills literally from almost the cradle. Sometimes, as with the Katie character who becomes an archer so quickly, sometimes there's that sort of poof, they've got all these skills and you never really kind of understand how they acquired them. But I thought they really invested that time and energy, but they also did it with his sister, which I don't remember from the comics. Now, that is probably because I didn't read many of them, but, and so I'm still kind of wondering where they're going to go with that, if they're going to turn her into a villain, because it sort of was leaning a little bit that way. But I did like the fact that he didn't instantly pop powers and be able to kick these guys' butts on the bus and, because gosh, he had a few classes.
Okay. Everybody cool with where we are?
Yeah, the only thing I would add is that the sister character probably was based on Fa Lo Sui from the Sax Romer novels, who is the daughter of Fu Manchu.
Well, and in the I get the two miniseries that came out around the time of the movie confused, but she was in, I think, the one about the 10 Rings and was getting involved with their father's business at that point. So let's talk a bit about his father and how Shang-Chi was raised to be an assassin and said, no, thank you. In the comic, he was raised to think he was serving the cause of good by killing evil people, according to this afternoon's research. So if that's not right, somebody chime in. But an MI6 agent caught him, couldn't hold on to him. He escaped, being Shang-Chi, and tracked down his mother, who was then living in London, who told him the truth about his father's criminal enterprises and goals, presumably his goals. Whereas in the movie, he went to kill the person who killed his mother. So it was more of a revenge motivation, and then followed through and couldn't do it again. And so kind of ran away to be a parking valet in, I think it was San Francisco. So which of those do you like better? As if you just had to pick one, if you were rebooting the series and you had to pick one, which would you pick? Steve, do you want to start?
Yeah, I will say I kind of like the way that he was handled in the comics, at least in the sense that this is a character who is kind of like who wants to be kind of this peaceful warrior monk. He doesn't want anything to do with his father, and he wants to stop his father's organization because he feels like he has to. But most of the time, what he's doing is trying to get away from all the nonsense. But because he's such a good martial artist and he is such a dangerous guy, everybody's after him. And so, he's constantly getting in these situations and he can never have the peace that he craves. And I really, really like that aspect of him. That was not shown in the movie, unfortunately. And I kind of like the way that they kind of handled that. Are there elements that could be updated and kind of worked with and tinkered with? Yeah, you could certainly do that. But I think that core is something that I kind of prefer over what they did in the MCU.
Okay. Len?
Narratively, I think that comic version works. Works better, but I appreciate the idea, the simplicity of the idea in the movie version where it's not his nature to kill, which creates a very different, you know, there's always the notion of my fists are a lethal weapon with a lot of martial artists, and to be the master of kung fu and he has no innate desire or need or drive to kill, even in the worst circumstance, that sets him up on a subconscious level in the viewer mind as being potentially heroic, not cowardly, just like, because we've seen that post in his training sequences get annihilated. So he's absolutely strong, absolutely skillful on that. But it's the innate, true internal refusal to kill, which says a lot more about a character as a person. If they could have woven both of those together, that would have been even better. But you know, I guess we can't have everything, right?
Yeah. Jenny?
Well, if I was rebooting, I'd reboot it completely differently. So, I mean, because that's the whole point of a reboot, to me, is to not tell the same origin story over and over again, which is why, you know, the Batman movies get tedious because, oh, I've got to see Bruce's parents killed one more time. Yay, I already know this. I like, well, and also you have to remember that the era when it's being created helps create your hero. In the 70s, anti-heroes were in. Okay, a guy who was, oh, I was an assassin, but I didn't know, and now I'm going to make it all better. That was very, very in vogue. That is not in vogue today, especially not out of Marvel movies. We really do want our heroes to be somewhat, we're letting it all slide on Black Widow because she turned good, but for the most part, that isn't how we want our heroes today. And I mean the general we, not necessarily the six of us on this panel. So if I was rebooting it, I would do something completely the same but different, just to make it new for a new audience whenever I was getting to do that reboot. I'm just tossing that out there in case someone from Marvel is listening. So, but I think the original origin story was very appropriate for the era it was in. And I think the movie origin story is very appropriate for the era that it is in. And I think when that gets rebooted again, it hopefully will be written for the era that it is in then.
Wayland?
That was very well said. I really liked the original comic story. I liked that he was the son of Fu Manchu until Marvel lost the rights anyway. And the actual origin of the character outside of the comics is they wanted to do a Bruce Lee comic. And Bruce Lee said no. And they said, oh. And then they made up Shang Chi. And then linked him to this old, pretty much unknown pulp villain that they managed to get the rights to. But I liked the idea of the training pretty much his whole life and being misled about what he was doing. Because, I mean, when you're a kid, if your parents were telling you something, the vast majority of the time, you're going to be like, okay, sure. Mm-hmm. And, you know, you don't know what the rest of the world is like if you never experience it. And he was also raised very much in isolation, aside from his trainers, if memory serves correctly. So I'd reboot it closer to that one because I really like the way that story plays out. But the MCU has made a lot of changes from the source comics, and I got to give them credit. Most of the time, the changes they make actually work. And I did very much enjoy the movie.
Jeannie?
Well, I have to agree with Jenny in that I think it was of its time. And in this particular case, that it is of its time here too. I had a little bit of trouble with the whole I'm a parking valet thing when I have a massive degree, and she does too. They're both parking valets. But I think that's of its time as well. And the fact that they're these two brilliant people who can't decide whether they, want to be anything more than friends. And there's a lot of things that are of our time and of that generation. But a lot of the whole concept of I came to this country to kill somebody when I was 14 and disappeared into the woodwork so my father could never find me, I had a little trouble with that. And the idea of him being a little more mature when he makes that decision, that from the comics where he's a little more mature and he has actually been doing this work and thinks that he's doing the right thing. So like Jenny, I probably would try to come closer to something between those. Jenny, you and I can write it together, right?
As long as Marvel is listening, absolutely.
Yes, absolutely. But that said, I truly did enjoy the setup, even though I thought, wow, 14-year-old on his own. Resourceful, hopefully, obviously. But it was a really interesting way to set it up. And I think that the other thing I thought, though, too, is, and again, this is just the way my brain works. Okay, so you came to the country 14, you're this incredibly advanced martial artist already, but no one you know knows this about you. When do you practice to be this good on the bus at the drop of a hat? Because I've done martial arts. And if you stop for a while, your muscles.
It's hard to pick back up.
Yeah. Your muscles don't like you going into action mode very quickly.
I think that's part of what they showed on his morning routine. It was that it's a fairly intense workout for somebody who just rolled out of bed.
Yeah.
Anybody want to add anything on that?
I did, but I forgot it with writing the script with Jeannie. I'm like, I had another comment, but it's gone.
Well, I can see how that could wipe other thoughts away. So I have a comment, and if it comes back to you, toss it in at the end. The thing I liked about the movie origin, which I suspect they may have used because it's just more streamlined and it's faster than going through all this about seeing him kill somebody and then seeing MI6 and all this other stuff. You get into the main meat of the story faster. But the thing I liked about that movie opening was his mother's a badass. And we don't, in my somewhat biased opinion, see enough female badasses in movies. And so to see her so powerful and defeat his father and then be teaching her children was a sequence that I really enjoyed just in itself, apart from whatever role it played in the movie or changing the origin or anything like that. I liked that.
I'll also add that I love that his aunt is Michelle Yeoh.
Yes.
Yes.
She can do no wrong as far as I'm concerned.
Right.
I'll agree. I will watch her in anything and everything.
Yeah.
Yes.
I remember what it was. This is a very, when you guys were talking about there's two kids who aren't doing anything, it's a very millennial movie. It is really aimed at that generation where you don't really know what you want. Everything's been promised to you. Nothing is coming out like it's promised. You have a ton of education and you don't want to actually work in that field now that you've found out about it. I can get by being a valet and I get to hang out with my bestie and we can figure out what we are later. So to me, this felt like a very, and that's not an insult, a very millennial film. Again, that's the era it's made in and the people it's aimed for. So I thought that was good. But in response to the 14-year-old kicked out, for me, one of the things I felt with that was that in a very, very subtle way, it's talking to the LGBT community because most of those kids, there is a horrific number of LGBT kids that are kicked out at that age and they have to survive. And that he does is inspiring, right? It's like, look, he had to leave because his father was horrible, just like you had to leave because your family was horrible and he survived. So you can too. So I think it's there. I think it's super subtle. I mean, it's certainly not spelled out. And the screenwriter might say, oh, I never intended that, but I got that from it. That it's sort of a little, there you go to the LGBT community because there are children that age and younger kicked out of their homes for who they love.
Anybody want to add anything else on this? Well, then let's talk about Katie for a minute. Did you like her? Did you think she worked as a character? And Len, why don't you start, please?
I think she worked as a character. I did not care for the instant archery at the end. I think that was very outside of the character because I felt that she was a true moral center. Kind of like, okay, she reflected a lot of the thoughts that Shang Chi was having, but there's also the point where, just sit in the back of the room and don't say anything. His dad will ignore you. First thing that happens, his dad asks her, "What's your name?" Which says, okay, this person ranks higher than what anyone possibly expected. And all she was just a person who had a job as a valet. I also like Awkwafina in most movies too. I think she's severely underrated, and I haven't seen enough of her movies.
Okay, Jenny?
So I'm biased.
I adore Awkwafina. I think she is freaking awesome. And if you haven't seen the second/third Jumanji movie, oh my God, she's
Outstanding.
amazing in that.
Yes.
So I was like, it's like Awkwafina, right? So I mean, anything that character was going to do, I was pretty much programmed to love. I didn't mind the instant archery because it's magic. They're in a magic realm, and she's being taught by a magical being. Okay, I had no problem with magical being patting her on the head and giving her everything she needed. You know, I've said one sentence, and that is the sentence you need because we are in the magic realm. So I had no problem with that. I loved the character.
Wayland?
I'm a little split on her. Awkwafina's fantastic. I liked Katie for like the first 2/3 of the movie. Great humorous sidekick. She did not end up being the damsel in distress, which I really is a trope needs to go away and die.
Yes.
I also sort of was not a big fan of the instant archery thing, maybe because I've been shooting a bow since I was about 6. But I can see why they wanted to basically give her something to do in the last battle. So I'm a little split on her. Overall, I like the character, and I'm hoping she's in the second one, but we'll see what happens.
Jeannie?
I think I will share the love about Awkwafina and this character. But I think that she provided a really much needed sort of grounding. We are still in 21st century America, and what the hell is happening? So I think she gave that sort of grounding in the present time, grounding in the present moment, where she was like, whoa, whoa, whoa. And I think that their couple friends that are like lawyers or whatever they're doing that they meet for drinks are also a super good grounding in like, okay, there's some fantastical things happening. Don't y'all worry. We'll take care of it. As we've already discussed, I did have trouble with the instant archery because I've attempted that archery business. That's tough stuff. The character overall, though, I thought she was a great foil, and I thought she was such a millennial character, as Jenny was saying, that she's so in that mode. And part of that actually comes from other roles she's been in that she sort of brings into the movie. She almost brings to every movie she's in, where it's sort of this, I'm a child of 3 different worlds, you know, my culture, my friends, my job, you know, okay, I'm a citizen of San Francisco in the US, but I'm also part of this culture that's thousands of years old. And then there are my friends, you know. So I thought she was a great foil, and I think she is going to continue to blossom as an actress and really do some great things. I loved her in Maya and the Dragon too. She was great.
Steve?
I really don't have a whole lot to add, just because I haven't seen a whole lot with her in it. I thought she was fine in this movie. I thought that her character was a decent, shall we say, a reader identification or viewer identification character. She's somebody that kind of reflects like what the viewer would see, as opposed to Shang, who is definitely of that world and can, you know, move amongst it. She's really somebody who's kind of like dragged along and having to sort of survive in that situation. So that kind of worked. I also thought that she worked as the sounding board character for Shang, where it's like, you know, he can explain things to the audience, but also, you know, she's somebody that can provide like a reasonable counterpoint to some of the things that he's saying, you know, dealing with his emotional arc, and kind of share that journey with him. So I thought that on that level, I thought that she worked. Yeah, the instant archery was a little silly, but, you know, I'm willing to kind of let that go. It's not a huge problem. But overall, I thought she was fine. I have no real complaints.
I thought she was an interesting change from the usual sidekick, and she's more outspoken. And like Steve said, I think she's a reader identification or viewer identification character, because then they can explain things to her and in the process explain them to us without it being an, as you know, Bob, scene that's so irritating. I had mixed feelings about the instant archery. I too took archery in school, but our bows had a sight on them, which was made by a hem gauge, which has a little sliding bump. And they had stuffed the hem gauge with styrofoam and put a glass-headed pin in it. So you could correct for left, right, and altitude. Trying to shoot the bow and actually hit the target without using the sight was extremely challenging. And those bows had a 20-pound draw weight. And I think if you're not fairly strong, drawing a bow that's heavy enough to actually hurt a dragon like that is just going to be next to impossible.
I would have dealt with that by actually having her pursue archery as a hobby and kind of telegraph that so that when it actually comes, she's actually able to do it and nobody would have any questions about it.
I'm going to speak to the natural athletes. I had archery in school. I was hitting bullseyes by the second day. Some people have the natural skill. I did. I'm not saying that I could go out with Wayland and hit anything, okay, other than, the side of a barn. But when I was doing it, by the second day, my instructor was like, "You've taken archery before." I'm like, "Nope." Okay. So some people can do it. So I was hitting the target at the shooting range very, very early on. Some people have that ability and magic. So it didn't bother me at all.
Well, and they do show that she's got incredible eye-hand coordination because she's peeling that car around corners. What's the phrase from Pretty Woman? Corners like it's on rails.
Yes.
Yeah.
She's got that thing peeling around, and she's handling it perfectly. And he's just like, "Oh, here we go again." Not worried a bit. She's got it under control. Mm-hmm. So that was a bit of a mitigating factor for the instant archery for me.
Well, and I think archery is more believable than hand-to-hand.
Yes.
Absolutely.
In those circumstances, and they wanted to give her something to do. But there's one other major character that we haven't talked about, and that is Shang Chi's sister, and I'm thinking her name is Xialing, but I don't really know if I'm pronouncing that
it's
right.
Xialing.
Thank you. So what did you think of the character and of her dynamic with Shang Chi? Jenny, will you start?
Yeah.
You want me to come back to you?
No. That's my answer.
Oh, okay. Sorry.
Yeah, no. Sorry. She was, for me, she's the character that was fine. I had to remember there was a sister. Okay. So she's filling the good person pulled to evil, or is it evil person pulled to good? Gosh, we don't know. And I did not care. I was happy she went off to take dad's stuff. Oh, she's going to be your good nemesis, bad nemesis, some kind of nemesis. Maybe she'll be helpful. Maybe she won't. Oh gosh. Again, I don't care. There's nothing wrong with the actress that played her. For me, of all the characters there, she is the most stereotypical, but I did not enjoy her particular stereotype. Again, I don't think it's the actress necessarily. But if we never see her again, I won't care. If we don't see Katie again, I'll care. If I don't get to see, the Magic Realm again, I'll care. If I don't get to see Sis again, she's off doing her thing. So.
Okay. Wayland?
I liked what they did with her in the movie. To me, it sort of had an element of like a twisted version of the prodigal son thing, where she's like, "Why am I doing all this stuff while you were gone?" He's like, "I didn't know that. I didn't know you were up to all of this." I thought she was a good character. She was also a pretty good source of information for the audience, because he's sitting there going, "What's going on?" And she's telling him all this stuff, and that's how we find out about the organization a little more. I thought the portrayal was great. In his original run, if I'm remembering right, from back in the 70s, he was like most heroes back then, no family. They just sort of exist on their own. I don't think his family started showing up until relatively recently in the comics. But I thought she was a fine character. I liked the portrayal, and if she's in the second one, and I have no information much about the second one, then it's going to be very interesting to see where she lands.
Okay. Jeannie?
Well, I'm sort of between the two. I liked her character, and I liked the ambiguity of her character. Is she going to be a bad guy? Is she really going to fill the position that the Mandarin does in the other comics? Because she has that possibility. She's got certainly got a cold-blooded streak like her dad, and let's just leave them there. They can just die. It's fine. Then I'll pay my brother back for leaving me. But I would hate not to see her again, because I think she's got a lot of possibilities for development, especially now that she knows about the other realm, the spirit realm, and she knows about some of the things that the rings can do and all that sort of thing. But if she didn't show up again, like Jenny, I think I'd be like, that's too bad. They could have done something with that, but oh well. So I'm a little sort of on the fence about her, but I loved her martial arts scenes, and I loved her training sequences where she's watching and then trying to adapt all of the things that her brother is being taught that she's not being allowed to learn. Mm-hmm. I thought that was harkened back to a lot of the things that I read as a kid, where it was like the secret, getting the secret skills because you have the desire to do it, right? Whether anybody will let you do it or not. So I liked her for that bit, but we'll see how they develop her.
Steve?
Yeah. Once again, this is a character who was based on Follow Sweet from the Sax Rohmer novels. She did appear in Master of Kung Fu at various times. But I will say that I didn't mind the way that they adapted her here. I thought the actress was quite good. I thought she did a very good job. But the thing with the Xialing character that I kind of appreciated is that they didn't go the direction of the comics on this one. Because she was kind of a villain there, and I was just like, okay, please don't do that. It would be so predictable. And then what ended up happening is that they give you the ambiguity, and ultimately, she does turn out to be a different character than the way that she was written as Follow Sweet. So I appreciated that. I will say that is she the best character that they could have done in this situation? And I will say no. I like the Jean, Lu and Yang siblings better in the comics. But I as for this movie, I thought that she worked well enough. I didn't have a problem with her.
Let me just ask you a follow-up question. What was the difference between the way it was done in the comic and the way it was done in the movie?
I just feel like the characters had more personality, especially the younger sister. I can't remember her name. I just thought that she was a fun character. She was somebody who's outwardly very fun, but she is very much her father's daughter in some respects underneath the sweet exterior and the fun exterior. And I dug that.
Okay, Len?
I'm kind of a mix of across the board here, because she was one of the weaker parts of the movie for me. I mean, now her motivation was excellent. Her acquisition of skills, loved how she did it. She took it upon herself to watch and copy and mimic what was going on. So she becomes the mistress of Kung Fu in secret. So there's a lot of interesting connection things that could be done there, but as the story didn't really, outside of the fighting pin and the connections to Shang-Chi's history and backstory, I didn't really feel like there was much going on with her. And again, like others have said, it's more because of the script than because of any of the performances.
Well, her most useful moment was helping them escape from her father's palace, because she knew all the tunnels and broke them out, right, essentially. But I thought her best scene in the movie, the best scene between her and Shang-Chi, was when they were in the fight cage together, because there seemed to be some emotional tension through there and some unresolved emotional conflicts. And it really hinted at interesting things to come that didn't come, because there were other things the movie wanted to do. But I thought she, as a character, based on that scene, had a lot of potential that just wasn't followed up in any way.
My only disappointment with the Fight Club scene, and I knew better to believe it when I first heard it, but there was this wonderful rumor going around for a while that Iron Fist from the Netflix series was supposed to pop up in there somewhere. And he didn't need to be a major character. They didn't really need to give him anything to do, but would have been a nice little nod to see him somewhere in the background or in one of the cage matches that weren't important.
Weren't they in a book together at one point?
Not an ongoing, but they've teamed up a bunch of different times.
There was a run on Iron Fist where Shang Chi did make regular appearances.
Okay. One of my favorite things they've done in some of the comics recently is they've started to inject a little bit more humor. I mean, they're still treating the character well, but they have some humor going in the background. Like there was this one fight going where, you know, in some of the martial arts movies, they have these bizarre names for all the attacks, like Fist of Two Serpents and Dragon. They had those going in the boxes for each move, and one of them was that move that Wolverine does when he gets really drunk. And I just thought it was a great adaptation of a classic martial arts thing in a world of superheroes. Because, yeah, you'd end up with something like that.
Logan, Drunken Master. I love it.
Yeah, touches on mutants and Drunken Master.
We know
he can actually really get drunk. I don't think he can. I think his metabolism.
He can. It takes
very difficult. He has to drink a lot.
Yeah.
Ta Lo kind of reminded me of Shangri-La. I read that novel in high school, and then I saw the movie. And it's the magical place that's isolated and it's hard to get to. It's kind of like Brigadoon. So I wondered what you all thought about that as a location and how you think it worked. Wayland?
I think Steve said it earlier. I can't remember for sure, so I'm stealing somebody's line from before. My apologies. But the way they did it reminded me a lot of the mystical city of Kunlun from Iron Fist. And that direct and its seeming copy of the concept seemed a little weird to me when they were trying to distance him from everything else and make him more unique. As a concept, I mean, you know, hidden magical realms, those are always popping up from like Narnia forward. I certainly have nothing against the concept. I'm not sure how well it fit with his background, but again, I think they made it work pretty well.
Jeannie?
Well, like you, the Shangri-La thing popped into mind immediately when I was watching the movie, and it adds the mystical element. It allows the 10 rings to be of 2 or 3 different worlds. By the time we get done with the movie, we're considering that they're possibly not even of this world. And sorry, y'all, spoiler. But the concept of that hidden realm, as Wayland says, is so familiar to all of us as comic book geeks or fantasy readers or both, that I just kind of went with it. And I liked that it was in some ways accessible and yet inaccessible. The father character stumbles upon it, actually. It seems like, I mean, they explain it a little bit better than that, but he does essentially kind of just stumble on it. And yet the daughter knows how to come and go. She's not done it, but she knows how to do it. And so, and then they use the Trevor character, which that was a little bit of an odd, the whole Trevor character thing was both a sort of a wink and a nod and funny, as well as being sort of a really, did we have to go there? But yeah, I liked it. I've always liked the whole hidden realm concept, but so I thought it was interesting. I thought it was fun.
Okay. Steve?
Yeah, I think Wayland is pretty much along the lines of what I would say. It is definitely Kunlun from the Iron Fist books. Not that that's bad. I think that it looks impressive. It looks magical. It looks like the kind of fantasy world that you want to see in a movie like this. So I think they did a good job with that. They did try to flesh it out differently a little bit in some respects. And I think, you know, so there are some details there, but at the same time, it's like, do we need Shang-Chi to do the exact same thing that Iron Fist does with the same place in his background? That kind of bothered me. But at the same time, looking at this movie, you know, for what it is, and, you know, just as a Shang-Chi film, and, you know, with that kind of magical martial arts thing, yeah, it's fine for this movie. It worked.
Okay. Len?
Yeah, I'm not every martial artist needs to have a deep connection with a magical realm city. But if you're going to have one, at least do it well. And they did that well here. It was it actually felt isolated. It didn't feel like everybody and anybody could come and go as they please. It felt difficult to get there. It was visually distinct. I enjoyed it more when it was the early on scenes where you have mom and dad fighting. But yeah, I didn't need it, but if you're going to do it right. And well, they did it right.
Okay. Jenny?
I am married to a man who would rather watch a 30-year-old Hong Kong flick than whatever came out today. And clearly, and all y'all have not spent the same time with my husband, and it shows. That's in every martial arts movie. There is almost everyone. There is the mystical thing that the heroes have to get to. Where the Peach Emperor lives in Forbidden Kingdom, where that one's coming up because this movie reminded me most of that. But that is a very consistent thing. And for me, getting there was what made this actually feel like a true Chinese mystically inspired movie. And the Chinese have been doing this a lot longer than Narnia. That made it feel real to me. That made it feel like, oh, this is a really excellent martial arts mysticism film. Zoo Warriors takes place literally in this plane and that other plane. And I mean, I could start, my husband could just walk in here and start listing the movies that this happens in. So for me, I thought it was great. I am not a big Iron Fist fan, and I never watched the show. I don't even know if they're going to pull Iron Fist back into the MCU. Technically, all those Netflix shows are not in the MCU. So did they want to use sets? Did they want to use sets from Iron Fist for Shang-Chi? I don't care. I liked it. I thought it was beautiful. It felt very magical. It did everything it was supposed to do. And knowing that it was there was, for me, elevated the movie beyond just the next Marvel entry. Look, there's a superhero, into something where they did a beautiful version of a style of film that I have, through marriage, had to become very familiar with. So I thought it was great. I don't have any of the complaints y'all have.
Well, there was one thing that I know Wayland wants to talk about before we go, and that is, why was Shang-Chi created in the first place?
Well, I touched on it briefly earlier. Marvel is really, really good at jumping onto a bandwagon, and martial arts movies were really big in the 70s, and they wanted to do a Bruce Lee title. And they had someone approach Bruce Lee's people, and Bruce Lee looked at the proposal and said no. And they were not expecting that at all. So they had started production on some stuff and then had to do a bunch of changes. And so Shang-Chi is essentially the slightly Marvelized version of Bruce Lee. And then they drew in the whole Fu Manchu thing and everything else until they lost the rights to him as well. But yeah, that's how he started. And it was, a lot of these stories get really interesting if you read the behind the scenes stuff on them.
Yeah. Well, they could have put him in the 31st century and called him Karate Kid. I mean, there's that option as well.
There is.
Yep.
Is there anything anybody wants to talk about before we wrap up? No.
I was really hoping the guy on the bus with the phone was going to turn into the Shang-Chi's movies version of Luis from the Ant-Man movies. I was hoping he'd play up a little more.
Yeah.
And everyone's been talking about a sequel. Simu Liu, and I'm sure I'm pronouncing that horribly, and my apologies, himself has been tweeting about it recently, and he's been saying that it's going to happen, but the production has been pushed back several times. That's about as detailed as he's gotten. But considering his Twitter account is how he got the role in the first place, I'm going to put some degree of trust in what he's saying on Twitter.
Which, that part alone cracks me up. I just love that.
Well, one of my favorite little moments in the movie was the guy with the machete hand, who is just
Razor Fist.
Yes, Razor Fist, who's like the ultimate example of thuggishness. And then they're in Ta Lo, and the little evil dragon soul stealers are coming. And before that, I think it's Michelle Yeoh who says, "We need to work together." And he's like, "Yeah, no." And then they come out and he's like, "We need to work together." And I just thought it was interesting that that character would be the one on that side that says we need to work together when he seems in so many ways to be a stereotype of a movie villain.
And did you catch the license plate on his car when they stole it?
No, I didn't see it.
Shang Chi is one of his very few recurring villains from the comics is Razor Fist. And this was a version of it, but they never actually call him that in the movie. But when they stole his car to get away, it's a vanity plate that says Razor Fist.
Yeah.
Which I thought was a great little nod.
Yeah. Anything else anybody wants to add?
Well, I'm just hoping that in the sequel, we do get to explore the whole mysticism of the Ten Rings, because for the fact that the movie is called that and they are in the title, we get very little about what they can do and why they make their wearer immortal and what kind of power do they create. So yeah, I'm looking forward to that.
All right, then we'll go around. Please tell people where they can find you and information about anything recent or upcoming that you'd like to draw people's attention to. Wayland, we start?
As I said, I write under the name Wayland Smith. All my social media is some version of that. It's at Wayland Smith 1 on Twitter, which is just the easiest one to do a real quick thing for. I do reviews for pretty much every superhero TV show and movie and some of the actual comics on a site called comicbookclog.com. I didn't name it. I just work there. I pop up at various conventions here and there. And I think my next one, if I have my schedule correct, is going to be Dragon Con a couple of months from now. I don't know what it'll be in relation when this video actually goes live.
Jeannie?
You can find me at jeanneadams.com or in most social media by that name. You can find me here on ConTinual a whole lot, and I'm going to miss Dragon Con this year. Out.
Oh,
Pardon?
That's very sad.
It is very sad, but I'm taking my youngest to college, so. And you can find me here on ConTinual a lot. I think I said that. So I've got 2 novellas out in the Kingdom Castle series, and Nancy and I should have another book out in the Outcast Station series sometime before the end of the year.
Steve?
Yeah, you can find me at Shadewing on Twitter. And in terms of the stuff that I promote for Omen Comics and Revelation Comics, the Twitter address is at Revelation Comic, no S. And beyond that, I believe I have Blitz #2, which is one of my main comics. Will be coming out in 2024 is the tentative release date that I have right now. So there's that. I also review for Comic Crusaders, where I do some podcasts occasionally, but also occasional reviews of TV shows and video games, things like that.
Len?
My website is len-berry.com. You can find me on Twitter at Len Berry _. I know it's weird. Some version of Len Berry all across social media. The next big thing I'm doing is I'm going to finish up a sci-fi book so that I can really start pumping things out again. And by finish, I mean I'm on the last scene, so I need to get to that.
Yeah.
Denny?
JinnyKoch.com. I'm on Twitter at Gini Koch. I'm all over Facebook in a million different ways. I'm also on Pinterest. I will be, like Wayland said, I'm not sure when this is coming out, but in a week, from when we're recording, I head to San Diego Comic-Con. I get home from that, and then it's Gen Con Indy, and then I get to see everybody at Dragon Con, and I'll be at World Fantasy Con in Kansas City in October as well. And recent releases, Dragon-esque, the anthology from Zombie Meets Brains is releasing, I think, Saturday. And I have pre-releases with me that I can't talk about yet at San Diego Gen Con and Dragon Con that hopefully by the time I'm home from Gen Con, I can actually start out loud promoting. But I have some pre-release titles with me all along the way.
And you can find me here at ConTinual. My website is nancynorthcott.com. I'm still on Twitter where I'm at Nancy Northcott. My latest release is The King's Champion, the 3rd volume in the Boar King's Honor historical fantasy trilogy. It's set during the summer of 1940 and the Battle of Britain. And as Jeannie said, we will have another Outcast Station book out by, I'd like to say by the end of the fall, but definitely by the end of the year. So thank you to everyone on the panel. Thank you to everyone who's watching. And thank you to our sponsors, Heroes Aren't Hard to Find and Heroes Convention. For more information about them, visit heroesonline.com.